Hello viewers, this is Law 254, your favorite legal show that seeks to demystify the law, give you useful tips and guidance on how you can interact with the law on a day-to-day basis, basically putting the law in your hands. My name is Wakili Kitty, I'm an advocate of the High Court. So, sexual matters are pretty complicated matters, and what's still, sexual offenses are very complicated offenses. And this week we've had a renowned artist, Kwenye Beat, and I think Hope Kid, who have been accused of having committed sexual offenses. And it's sad that, you know, we have these artists who are purportedly singing for the kingdom, but silently sinning in freedom, you know. It is pretty unfortunate. And today we just want to interrogate what that offense, that particular offense means, where it is hedged in law, and what are the consequences for that offense. So the reason as to why sexual offenses are complicated offenses is because it involves a number of things. So first of all, I will discuss broadly the concept of consent, because consent is usually a big defense in sexual offenses world over, whether it's rape, whether it's sexual assault. Consent is usually a huge pillar or a huge defense in any sexual offense. So what is consent? Consent is simply allowing or conceding to the sexual transaction. And this consent could be actual or constructive consent. All right? And the reason as to why consent is pretty complicated is because it is not cast in stone. It's dynamic. You could have consented to having a particular sexual activity, but not another. You can actually consent to having vaginal penetration, but not anal sex. So in the course of the transaction, if this person shifts gears and has anal sex with you, then you can actually say that you did not consent, and that becomes illegal. Consent can be withdrawn midway. You can have begun a transaction and then all of a sudden you change your mind and withdraw the consent. If this person continues with the transaction without consent, then that can be illegal. Consent can also be conditional. So you can say, yes, I'm agreeable to us having sex, but with protection. If this person proceeds to have sex with you without protection, then that means consent was not procured and it can be illegal. So the concept of consent is pretty amorphous, all right? And that's why the prosecution needs to be really careful in understanding how the two parties arrived at having sex in the first place. So if you're to go to the particular offense that Kwenye Beat and Hope Kid are accused of having committed, and that is simply transmitting life-threatening sexual disease, whether it's herpes or whatever it is, that's illegal under the law. If you knowingly, intentionally, and willfully transmitted a life-threatening sexual disease, then you could be liable to 15 years of imprisonment or life if it's HIV and AIDS. So that's the position in law. If you transmit something knowingly, you see now that complicates things. What does knowingly mean? You could be having a sexual disease and you know, or you could be having a sexual disease and you do not know. So does it mean that if you transmit a sexual disease without you knowing, you are criminally liable? So the aspect of knowing is also very critical and very complicated. What does knowing entail? There is the actual knowledge. Actual knowledge entails diagnosis. So if you went to the doctor and the doctor told you, hey boss, you have this particular disease, and you even have medications for it, it will be said that you knew you have a sexual transmitted disease. And if you proceeded ahead with the sexual transaction, then already liability has crystallized. And there is also constructive knowledge. Constructive knowledge is if over the past few months before the transaction, you've been looking at yourself down there and you're like, yo, there's some strange things happening, and you know for sure that you could be having a sexual transmitted disease, and then you proceed into having a sexual transaction, then it could be said that you had constructive knowledge of the same and you infected this other third person knowingly, and liability at that point will also crystallize. So the person who's affected, the victim, can claim in a number of forms. Of course, there's criminal liability, but there's the fact that this person has been embarrassed, has gone through trauma, there's medication involved, and she can claim for a whole range of compensatory damages with regards to that under a civil suit. and get paid for the damage or the harm that they could have endured. So I think that's it. It's not a very straightforward case like, because you infected this person with a sexual transmitted disease, then you are liable. It involves also other things. And back to the concept of consent, it could be, and this is a bit complicated with regards to this particular offense. If the lady consented to sexual intercourse knowing that the gentleman had the disease, then that could be a defense at face value, though the consent needs to be informed. There's also another angle. It needs to be informed consent. If we are engaging in a sexual transaction and we are in the heat of the moment before we begin the penetration, and I tell you, I have herpes or I have HIV, and you continue to have sexual intercourse with me, that will not be said to be consent because it was within the heat of the moment. So for it to suffice as a defense, I must have told you prior, a few days to, that look, we're going to have sex, but then I am infected with herpes or I'm infected with HIV. Then if at that point you agree to us having sex, then it can be said that the consent is informed and it will be upheld as a defense. So it's a pretty tricky way to prove this. It's not as straightforward as people think. But the mere fact that we have a gospel artist engaging in illicit sexual transactions is appalling, and I think that's why it has led to a lot of public outcry and backlash. So as always, if you're having any issues, if you are to do with your sexual offenses, if you're having any complaints, it is always advisable to reach out to a lawyer in good time because sometimes evidence gets eroded.